is from Isaiah 53, 1 to 9 and 11. Who can believe what we have heard, and for whose sake has the Lord's arm been revealed? He grew up like a young plant before us, like a root from dry ground. He possessed no splendid form for us to see, no desirable appearance. He was despised and avoided by others, a man who suffered, who knew sickness well. Like someone from whom people hid their faces, he was despised, and we didn't think about him. It was certainly our sickness that he carried and our sufferings that he bore, but we thought him afflicted, struck down by God, and tormented. He was pierced because of our rebellions and crushed because of our crimes. He bore the punishment that made us whole. By his wounds we are healed. Like sheep we had all wandered away, each going its own way. But the Lord let fall on him all our crimes. He was oppressed and tormented, but didn't open his mouth. Like a lamb being brought to slaughter, like a ewe silent before her shearers, he didn't open his mouth. Due to an unjust ruling, he was taken away, and his fate, who will think about it? He was eliminated from the land of the living, struck dead because of my people's rebellion. His grave was among the wicked, his tomb with evildoers, though he had done no violence and had spoken nothing false. After his deep anguish, he will see light, and he will be satisfied. Through his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will make many righteous and will bear their guilt. The word of God for the people of God. Our gospel lesson today is from Mark 8, 31 to 38. Then Jesus began to teach his disciples, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and the legal experts, and be killed, and then after 3 days rise from the dead." He said this plainly, but Peter took hold of Jesus and, scolding him, began to correct him. Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, then sternly corrected Peter. "Get behind me, Satan. You are not thinking God's thoughts, but human thoughts." After calling the crowd together with his disciples, Jesus said to them, "All who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. All who want to save their lives will lose them, but all who lose their lives because of me and because of the good news will save them. Why would people gain the whole world but lose their lives? What will people give in exchange for their lives? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this unfaithful and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he comes in the Father's glory with the holy angels." The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. I've been reading a book called The Battle Cry of Freedom, and it's a history of the Civil War. And I just read one about called What Hath God Wrought, which is about the years, the generation before the Civil War. And something happened, about the 1840s. The South, in particular South Carolina, every time they get in some kind of conflict, they start to say, well, if you don't do it our way, we'll leave the Union. If you take away our slaves, we'll leave the Union. You take away our way of life in this peculiar institution, we'll leave the Union. If you elect that black Republican, Abraham Lincoln, we'll leave the Union. And he was, and they did. And it led to that conflagration where more people died in 2 days at Gettysburg than died in 10 years in Vietnam. More soldiers fell. Well, as many as 850,000 lives were required to bring an end, and South Carolina and the South, they lost their slaves. Well, about 100 years later, right around 100 years later, Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And a number of the Dixiecrats, the Democrats from South, Old South, thought that was terrible, and they left the Democratic Party and became Republicans. And it changed your party, our party. Changed it. Not the party of Lincoln anymore. Because we hear the same kind of, if you do this, then well, you know how it's gone. And keeps going. There must be another way. Because we are not a nation dedicated to, I'm right, and if you don't agree with me, I'm going to take my football and go home. We are a nation based on what Thomas Jefferson wrote, all people are created equal. That includes blacks, Mexicans, Muslims, Jews, and that jerk on the corner you can't stand. Absolutely equal. And are given certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the ground foundation of our nation. That we would even reach in that direction and progress in that direction and move through the Civil War and the disposal of slavery. There's still millions of people around the world being caught up into slavery. And we know it's wrong. There's no question that it's wrong. And we had to move into civil rights, and we're starting to figure out that may not, barring people from the polls, paying women an average of only 70% of what men are paid for the same work. We have progressed. And that progression started with one man who was more than a man. One person in history, that's Jesus the Christ. Because Jesus started by talking with, are you ready, a Samaritan woman. That would be like talking with somebody. Everybody knew the reputation of that woman. And a man talks to her, and he's painted by her brush in the public mind. Jesus started that. Treating each person as equal with equity. He dined with prostitutes and those Roman toady tax collectors, and he brought the children to him. Children were nothing, and yet he brought them together and treated them with equity. Equity. In our relationship, we are created equal. Oh, there's lots of inequalities. But we are going to look at how we are created equal. And for 2,000 years, we've been working in that direction. It's been an uphill struggle. Every step of the way, there have been those who cling to the old ways, to the right ways, to the God-given ways, and they quote the Bible up one side and down the other, because the devil himself can prove his point using the Bible. And yet, they're grasping on a past that was the old way, and Jesus has another way. The other way. And that way is to turn around. Turn around and accept the good news. Be joyous in the good news. What's this good news? That when you turn around, when you turn away from yourself and your background, that says that all these things must be true because my pappy said it's true, my grandpappy said it's true, the great-grandpappy, and everybody agrees with me that those people are secondary and they aren't so smart and they just don't belong. when you let go of that and turn around, something happens. And the world changes. The world changes for you first and for everyone else. But when Jesus did this turning around there on the road, and he said, I'm going to Jerusalem, and they're going to arrest me and beat me and torture me and kill me, that was way too much turning around, because you're not supposed to talk like that, Jesus. You've got to have positive thinking. You've got to think and grow rich. You've got to prove yourself as a mighty power of God. And going and dying seems to me like a terrible way to prove it. It's like going to a ball game and saying we're going to lose. It is. It sounds like that. And yet Jesus is turning around because he is the Messiah. Everybody thought the Messiah was a king or a warrior or a priest. And Jesus knew that all of these are just shades of the power of God. And the power of God is different. It goes the other way. And so Peter rebukes. The word rebuke means cusses out. And then Jesus turns and rebukes Peter in the same way he rebuked unclean spirits. He said, get behind me, Satan, because you're talking human and I'm talking God. I'm talking the other way. And then he turned to everybody, to you and me. He said, if you're going to follow me, you're going to have to pick up your cross. Now, the first thing we think is, oh my God, I'm going to have to carry a cross. Oh, these struggles, these trials are too much for me. I can't handle it. And then, like the gal on the Unwrap the Bible says, I'm going to Twitter my suffering, and I'm going to make a selfie of myself following God. I'm working so hard at following God. But Jesus said, no. My yoke, my crossbeam is light. It's light. Don't let the world and Satan or yourself, all your habits, tell you it's going to be a problem. Lift up your cross. Carry what God has called you to do and move in the way of Christ. And you'll discover it is light. Not only is it light, it is shining light. It is spectacular light. New possibilities open for you. New wonders become possible. You never know what God has in mind. When I was coming out of high school and through college, finally graduated from college, I thought of myself as sitting in the middle of this room with doors all the way around. Now, these were all the possibilities, because everybody had said to me all my life, you can be anything you want to be. And I had no idea what I wanted to be. Because I felt that if I moved towards one door, I'd be moving away from another one. Until God whacked me upside the head and said, "Boom. You are either, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. You're either going to have to go in the handbasket business and make a buck off it, or you're going to go in the ministry and fight it. And open up a new possibility for people." And my pastor said, "Well, that's interesting about the handbasket, but let's talk about ministry." And slowly and painfully and surprisingly, here I am. I went through one of those doors. The one I didn't even realize was there. Went through the door, and as I walked down that direction, here were all these other possibilities opening up for me. I wanted to be a great filmmaker. Guess what I got to do? I got to make videos and films. I wanted to be a writer. I got to write a lot. A poet. The song we're going to sing as our closing is my poem. I got to tell you, a lot of things I never thought I could do, and I certainly couldn't do as long as I sat in the middle. It wasn't until I answered the call of God and picked up some crosses. Most of seminary is a cross. Some have been there. And the church can be a cross because there were real people. And all of this can be painful and difficult. Loving people and caring for people and being family with people, and when something is wrong, crying with people. It's the most wondrous thing you can do. Absolutely wondrous. It's a lie that all this stuff is a struggle. It's wondrous. Because we let go of ourselves when we turn around and face others. And then we discover and accept and rejoice in the good news. The good news is you are alive, you are created to be a loving presence in the world. You're created to share Jesus Christ in little ways and big ways. You are created to take up your cross and follow Christ. Maybe you've heard the story of the Gray Lady. Back in the 80s, when we didn't know anything about AIDS and we didn't have any real treatments for it, and AIDS was a deadly disease, and it was so sure to kill you that we didn't even want to touch anybody or be around anybody because we didn't know exactly how it was passed, how contagious it was. And people were afraid of AIDS patients, especially in the hospital. And this one Gray Lady, a volunteer in a hospital, was washing her hands one day in the restroom, and she looked in the mirror, and she clearly heard God say, "Go to this room and visit with this man." And she said, "No, I can't do that. I might get what he's got. And then I'd die." And then she realized that God would take care of that. Of course he would. Dying's not the worst thing that can happen to you, because God is with you. And God is more with you. And so she went down the hall to this room where the nurses kind of walked on the far side of the hall as they went by. The doctor would take about one step in with his mask and say, "Are you okay today?" And the chaplain would still stand out the door and says, "I'm praying for ya." She walked in that room. She went up to his bed. She sat down in the chair. She took his hand. She told her name, and he shared his. And they just talked. They talked about this and that and the other. Half an hour. And shaking, like she hadn't shook yet, she left that room and went and washed her hands. And then she did the next day, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. And they began to talk about the important things of what this man was going to lose, where his denial was, his anger was, his arguing with God, his depression, huge depression. It wasn't happy time, because he was going to die. And he didn't feel well. And she sat there and held his hand and let him talk most of the time. And when he couldn't talk, she asked him, "Can I pray for you?" And she would pray. Sometimes when he was too tired to even really open his eyes, she would sing "Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." And he would squeeze her hand. And on that last long day, she was there. She was there for the last breath. And she didn't let go of his hand until he was gone. Later, out in the hall, the nurse asked her, "Weren't you afraid?" And she said, I am terrified. I may have got that disease, but that doesn't matter. His life mattered more than mine. And that's a good thing. And that's a good thing. Jesus leads us the other way, on a path that's different than the world. And anytime you go on a journey, you need to have some food. I just noticed that Methodists don't come to the altar rail, have an altar call, unless we provide food. When I was a kid, we had 4 communions a year. That's in the discipline. You have to have 4. And back then, the preachers stuck to 4. But we went to the Christian church, Disciples of Christ, and they have communion every Sunday, and they were passing around the big tray of the little cups, and they were passing around the little plate with the broken saltine crackers on it. And my sister, who was about 6 at the time, said, "Oh, goody, refreshments!" Yes! Oh, goody! We get refreshments, because the night that Jesus decided to go the complete other way, the night he gave himself for them, he knew his disciples were on a journey, and he offered them a meal. And he took the bread, he gave thanks to God, and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Eat it in remembrance of me." And likewise, after the meal, he took the cup. He gave thanks to God. He said, "This wine is the blood of the new covenant, my blood of the new covenant, poured out for you and for the salvation of many. Drink it, all of you, in remembrance of me." And so we come to this table, this refreshment, this food for the road, once again committing ourselves to take up the cross. And with this strength of Christ in us, follow on his way. I invite you to come forward as the Spirit so moves. We start to share in the communion. You want to come help? Okay, you got to help this time. Do you want to help too? You want to help? And now may the Lord bless you. Now may the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. And the Lord lift his countenance upon you and grant you peace. Wait for the key change. It's coming. I hear the Spirit moving. It's moving through this church. We're all